Ahoy! Deadlock has a difficult learning curve, and to make it a little bit easier for yourself, you can start out with a hero that's easy to pick up. So in this video I'll be ranking what I believe to be the top 7 heroes for beginners to start out with. First up, some quick honorable mentions that almost made the cut and an explanation why they didn't. Warden, Infernus and Lash, which all are relatively easy to play, but require a certain degree of expertise regarding positioning. Also, Talon and Vindicta, which I know a lot of beginners have good success with, but you have to be very good at aiming to play these characters effectively. So if you mainly played shooters beforehand, you will probably pick these characters up very quickly. The most important factor for the top 7 was that they have a low skill floor. That doesn't mean that some of them don't have a high skill ceiling, it's just that you can pick up the basics easily, and when you're playing against other beginners, you should be doing fine. I specifically exclude characters that have a high team reliance, fall off heavily at certain stages of the game, like Lash for example, and generally chose characters that have a consistent experience throughout the match. First example in spot number 7 is Bebop. Now Bebop has a very straightforward kit. His first ability is a uppercut punch, his second ability places a bomb on the enemy that detonates after a few seconds, his third ability is a pull, and his ultimate is a massive beam that channels forward. But the beam alone makes this a beginner-friendly hero, because this beam can really decide a team fight. You can easily kill multiple enemies with this if you've built sufficient spirit, and this is a spirit-based character overall. His basic combo is also very easy. You use your 3 to pull an enemy in, your 2 to place the bomb on them, and you knock them away with your 1, and that's basically all you do in terms of poke and quick aggression. However, of course, the skill ceiling comes in when it comes to catching enemies, for example. Once you've put some points into the hook, it has a very long range, and you can use that to hook enemies from a very far distance. And obviously, this can be very easy or very difficult depending on how much the enemies are moving and how much practice you have, so this is where skill ceiling most certainly is a major factor. Likewise, you can see on his 2, on his bomb, that there's a number, and this increases whenever we apply this bomb to enemy players specifically and they get hit by it. So the more you do this throughout the match, the more damage you will get, and this is where, once again, more experienced players can get more out of this character, but it doesn't really matter in the beginning, because really, you just firing this beam is going to be enough for you to have an impact on the match. In the very early laning phase, Bebop can struggle a little bit, and sometimes it's best to sit close to your Guardian and just hook an enemy into the Guardian so they take care of that enemy instead. Other than that, it is worth noting that his gun has a bit of wind up. Before he fires, there's this charge up circle, which can be kind of annoying when you are trying to last hit. You kind of have 2 options here. Either you hold down completely and just fire through the entirety of the post animation and get the last hit afterwards, which often is probably your best bet, or you try to do the charge up again before the orb appears, which can be done with okay timing, but really isn't ideal. So we could be going like this, and then immediately hold again, and you get it relatively quickly, but this can lead to souls getting denied from you. But all in all, Bebop is definitely very suitable for beginners, so I highly recommend him. Spot number 6 goes to Mo and Krill. Mo and Krill's first ability heals them based on how many enemies are around and get hit by it in an AoE. His second ability burrows them underground, and then you can cancel the ability to jump up and fire at them for quite high damage. You can also decide to let this run out, and then at the end you'll jump up anyways. His third ability throws sand at enemy and temporarily disarms them. His ultimate locks down enemy and punches them over and over, but you also cannot move during this, you're locked in the same place. If the enemy gets killed, you get a permanent health increase by 30 health. While that sounds nice, consider that even a single statue, if you're lucky, will give you 15 max HP, so it's not an insane amount. Mo and Krill actually have a surprisingly decent gun for last hits. You can see the fire rate here is quite quick, so you can secure fairly easily. And of course you have that self-heal, so you can just run into enemies and have relatively high pressure very early on, even though you may not be the best at shooting from far range. But if you're getting pressured a lot in lane, then obviously throwing sand at your enemy is always an option as well, in order to disarm them and give you some breathing room. During his 2, you also have 80% bullet resist and 30% spirit resist, so it's a very nice way to get out unless you're using it aggressively. You can pretty much combo all of your abilities in a very quick burst like this, so you can fire off pretty huge damage in a short amount of time. I would recommend focusing on improving the second ability early on, since it has the highest damage by far. I'm giving spot number 5 to Haze, the assassin on the roster. Haze's kit is very simple. Her first ability is a sleep dagger, that temporarily disables enemies so you can get closer to them, or you can, for example, charge a heavy attack depending on how you want to engage. Her second ability is a stealth that also increases her movement speed, so a very traditional assassin. Her third ability is a passive that increases the damage on the enemy the more you hit them. As you can see, there's this marker above them that increases damage dealt. During her ultimate, she turns into a death ball with perfect accuracy, and this also makes her avoid 50% of the bullets going her way. As you can see here, the damage is significantly higher if only one target is in the radius, because otherwise damage gets split between all of the enemies. The last point in this ability somewhat proves this. Keep in mind that due to her passive, she requires you to aim relatively well, so if you're someone who is not good at aiming at all, then you may consider not using her. She has a rapid firing gun that makes it very easy to secure last hits at any point, which is nice for the laning phase. Otherwise, the laning phase is not the very best in the very beginning. You kind of want to unlock some abilities first, but once you get online, you have extremely high snowball potential. While Haze does gain some benefits from building Spirit, she mainly scales with gun damage. That's how most people play her. So if you're someone who is good at holding left click on an enemy, then she may just be your character. And the fact that she has that ultimate as a very easy get out of jail free button in any fight where she may be at a disadvantage also means that she's very suitable for beginners. Wraith in spot number 4 is in many ways similar to Haze, but makes things even easier for you. Her first ability, Card Trick, charges by dealing damage to enemies. When you've dealt sufficient damage, then you can throw a card at them. This card is incredibly easy to land on an enemy because you can control it even while it's flying. I can send it up and I can still drop it down on an enemy and it will lock onto them. Some of the easiest poke in the game. Her second ability is a teleport with a relatively long range, which can often get you out of sticky situations. Her third ability is a steroid that gives you and allies an increased fire rate temporarily. Her ultimate locks an enemy in place, pulls them into the air and briefly stuns them. This is some free damage you can get on them, and if you have this maxed, it even hits multiple enemies. As you can see, all of the descriptions for her abilities are incredibly short. There really isn't all too much to them. She just does a lot of damage. She just is a carry, typically built primarily with gun damage and maybe a little bit of spirit damage on the side. And as you can see, her gun is very fast firing, so you should have no issues securing any last hits at all. Really just overall a very easy character to pick up. Due to her high fire rate as well as her relative safety, she also has very good split push potential compared to many other heroes from early on in the game really. So it's absolutely worth considering going for a split push while others are teamfighting with her on occasion. In spot number 3 we have 7, but he is in some ways a little bit harder to play than Wraith. However, one thing completely makes up for that. 7's first ability throws a lightning bolt forward that stops on enemies and keeps ticking over and over, and then eventually passes through them and hits everything behind them. So if you dodge backwards while being hit by that, you get hit even more. His second ability applies a stun after a short duration and deals some damage along with that. His third ability gives his bullets some extra shock damage that also bounces to nearby enemies. But the real big deal about his kit is his ultimate, and that's what in my opinion makes him easier than Wraith. Because you can just jump into the enemies, press the ult, and hit all of them with an expanding AoE that deals a ton of damage. This is also why he's often, but not always, built with spirit damage primarily. And his ult damage is everything. You can see it hitting the creeps as well as the Guardian here as well. Literally anything on the map that can be targeted, except the last form of the Patron, as far as I'm aware, can be hit by the ultimate. On higher levels of play, you will eventually get counterplayed. You will have to run items like Unstoppable to be able to channel the ultimate, but on lower levels of play, in beginner areas, this ult is everyone's bane and everyone hates this character simply because they don't know how to deal with it yet. I have a separate video for countering heroes in the future, by the way. If you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. While 7's ult wins game, what's a bit annoying about his laning phase is that he has this weird burst fire, which can be a bit difficult for securing souls. Some people like it, but I personally find it a bit obnoxious to use, so that is worth keeping in mind. It was a fierce competition between spot number 1 and spot number 2, but I'm gonna give spot number 2 to Abrams. Abrams' abilities are incredibly simple. His first ability deals damage to enemies and heals you for part of the damage dealt. His second ability is a charge that can push enemies into walls and stun them, and otherwise just pushes them around. His third ability is literally just passive regeneration that you can see I can level up and increases even more. His ultimate takes him into the skies and then he slams down and he stuns enemies. Not much more to it either. Even Abrams' gun is pretty alright because it can fire and you can reload and fire at the same time. So I'm reloading here, but in order to secure the souls, I just fire some shots and then reload the rest, which I think is very convenient to make sure that you get all the last hits as a beginner. And of course, if you get poked out of lane, you have very easy ways to get some of that health back quickly with your multiple sustain options, so that is also very helpful for him. You're just unlikely to bully enemies out of lane early. Also remember to make use of his melee attack. You can combo that with his 2 especially and kinda have enemies get hit by a heavy charge into the second ability itself into another heavy charge attack if they get hit on a wall. You likely won't bully enemies out of lane, but you also don't have to. You'll be effective later on anyways. I would not recommend using the main build for him because this, for example, this Berserker as second item, this order is not the order in which you are meant to purchase things, so this is not suitable for beginners. I think the second build, for example, is a lot more easy to understand and effective. And that brings us to spot number 1, which I am giving to McGinnis. McGinnis as a character is very straightforward. She can place down a turret, and this turret will shoot enemies. You can actually place multiple once you get charges for that. And her second ability is a self-heal that also gives you a fire rate increase. Her third ability is the most skill sealing thing that she has, which is the wall that you can place. It kind of wanders forward and you can stop it at any point in order to place it. You can also tear it down again. That is basically what makes the difference between a good and a bad McGinnis. And her ultimate is a barrage that fires from a longer distance that does big damage, but you have to keep in mind that if an enemy gets too close to you, you can't actually hit them. If you don't know what to do yet, you can just get extra charge, you can level your first ability, and all of a sudden you have 3 turrets that you can place down relatively quickly after each other, and that will kinda give you a lot of safety in lane or wherever you fortify your position. Keep in mind that while your own damage is gun damage, the turrets deal spirit damage. It is worth noting that McGinnis only has 2 dodges, different from most other characters, which generally have 3. But she has a very fast-firing gun as well. You can see that that's very easy secure too. It kind of charges up in fire rate, but even the slowest fire rate is enough to easily secure any souls that you want to shoot. The reason why I think McGinnis is such a good beginner character is, of course, on one hand you have turrets doing part of the job for you. You do need to aim yourself a bit, but also you have this insane fire rate, which just means you generally deal a lot of damage to anyone trying to get close to you in the first place. You also have a self-heal if you are ever getting pressured. That gives you a little bit more survivability. And you can split push like crazy as well. Your structure damage is pretty insane later in the game, which means that even if your team is not doing what you want them to do at all yet, if you're trying to win the game, if you go for some split pushes, you can do that on your own. McGinnis' biggest weak spot by far is her lack of mobility. Again, she only has 2 dodges, dashes, whatever, as well as doesn't have any other significant mobility abilities in her kit. The only thing she has for safety is her wall. However, that won't really matter all too much as a beginner because the people you're playing against won't be able to capitalize on that sufficiently. They won't know what your ult's range is yet, and as such, you will be able to go fairly uncontested in most of your early matches. That is of course unless you are struggling to aim, but in that case, number 2 Abrams is a perfect fit for you. With that said, I think all characters in Deadlock are absolutely worth trying out, and many of the characters that I didn't mention may be suitable for you if you have a specific playstyle that just suits that character. These are just some tips to help you find your footing if you have been unable to decide or haven't been able to find a good match for you just yet. In the next days, there will be more beginner tips, so if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. There will be tons of other upcoming Deadlock content as well. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. SLOTH, out.